No.
We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. And thing sucks.
In 5, 4, 3.
Citizens of the internet.
Hello?
Happy New Year. This is, of course, my first live stream of the new year. And I just want to make sure that my camera is working properly, because it sort of looks like, okay, it is. So welcome to another exciting episode of the Politics Show. I got a lot of this stream has been a long time coming, and I always cut myself off, but I've got a lot of content. You know, I debated at the end of 2023 whether or not I should put together a kind of best of show. And then I thought, I've only got like 330 subscribers. Not a lot of live stream viewers. People watch the live streams, but not usually while they're live. So I thought, that would be like maybe a giant waste of time for me to do, because I did a lot of good pieces last year, but it would have been me combing back through all my own stuff, put together a best of reel for you guys. And I didn't think it was worth the time. There's so much stuff coming so fast. And, all the other shows do a great job covering it. Do Dissidents and Jimmy Dore, that whole combination has been fantastic. They're putting up stuff constantly. They always have good takes and good political commentary. So stuff to compete with that. And I'm not trying to compete with that. I'm obviously a huge fan. But the struggle for me, I think, is to maybe bring something to the table that's a little bit different, considering that those two streams have such a huge viewer amount. I want to separate myself a little bit at the very least, and not be. I'm going to cover some of the same things, obviously, because they're big news items. But I don't want to just basically be a carbon copy of all the shows that I love to watch. So I thought we would start today by talking about the Biden administration and the upcoming presidential campaign, because I've had this image in my head for a long time of the book The Emperor's New Clothes and the phrase "the empire has no clothes," because to me that's what Joe Biden represents, really. He represents the visibility, the reality that the president is just a figurehead, just a public face for the administrative state that works behind the scenes, and truly runs the country. And those people are not elected. Those people, a lot of people would refer to them as the deep state, I guess. But I think the one positive aspect of the Joe Biden presidency is having this kind of geriatric, obviously carefully handled leader, is just kind of lays bare the reality of what's going on in the country. Not that we didn't all know, but now we have definitive proof, right? Because the guy who they're putting on stage can't even string a sentence together, and sometimes doesn't even know what room he's in. And Trump's whole, imitation of that, Biden trying to find his way off stage, has been pretty funny to watch because it's accurate. So let's get it started here by talking about President Joe Biden's recent speech. And I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm just going to play this one little clip for you, because you know what the gist of it is about. And we're going to go deep into this in some of the other segments as well, but just listen.
The 2024 election is all about. The choice is clear. Donald Trump's campaign is about him, not America, not you. Donald Trump's campaign is obsessed with the past, not the future. He's willing to sacrifice our democracy, put himself in power. Our campaign is different. For me and Kamala, our campaign is about America. It's about you. It's about every age and background that occupy this country. It's about the future we're going to continue to build together. And our campaign is about preserving and strengthening our American democracy.
Democracy.
3 years ago tomorrow,
That buzzword.
we saw with our own eyes the violent mob storm the United States Capitol.
The violent
It
mob.
was almost in disbelief as you first turned on the television. For the first time in our history, insurrectionists had come to stop the peaceful transfer of power in America. First time. Smashing windows, shattering doors, attacking the police. Outside, gallows were erected as the MAGA crowd chanted, "Hang Mike Pence."
Oh, that's funny. So, first of all, this is just a clip, but this is the recurring theme throughout the speech. So, first of all, let's talk about the quote unquote violent insurrection. Here's another clip of Biden from a couple months ago that I remembered that I think is just very relevant to the conversation about the insurrection, the gunless insurrection, the idea that a bunch of protesters were going to take over the country. And they didn't have any weapons. They didn't have any guns. The only person that was killed that day or even shot at was Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by a Capitol police officer. But listen to this. This is just a quick reminder of how legitimate these claims are from Joe Biden's own mouth.
An automatic weapon. You can't go out and buy a cannon. And for those brave right-wing Americans who say it's all about keeping America's independent and safe, if you want to fight against the country, you need an F-15.
There it is. If you're going to fight against a country, you need an F-15. I don't know if it gets any better than that, but that's him basically admitting that, hey, the armed insurrectionists never had a chance of taking over the country. He's kind of spilling the tea there a little bit, so to speak. And we're going to get into the democracy thing in just a minute when we talk about the Iowa caucuses. We're going to show you how much the Democrats really care about democracy. But before we do that, I would like to talk about our former president. Well, no, let's actually do that. Never mind. I split these up a little bit differently. So you saw Biden basically lay to waste his own claim about insurrections with that comment about F-15s. But what about the Democrats' supposed, thirst for democracy? How does that pan out? Well, next week, Monday, is the first round of primaries in the U.S. in the form of the Iowa caucuses. So I don't know if you remember this or not, but several years ago, there was an Iowa caucus, and there was a little bit of an incident that occurred during the Iowa caucuses. And I want to start with this piece I found from The Economist, which talks about how the Iowa caucuses are changing in 2024. 5 decades of tradition have been overturned by the Democrats. That's how much they care about democracy. So The Economist is paywalled, but I did get a little chunk of this article that I'm going to read you real quick. A saying in Iowa has it that a candidate has to shake a voter's hand 7 times to win their support. Those competing in the 2024 Republican primaries have little time left for hand clasping. On January 15th, registered Republican voters in the Hawkeye state will launch America's primary season, picking the candidate they want to represent the party in the presidential election in November. Iowans have an unusual way of choosing. Since the 1970s, voters have gathered in town halls, school gymnasiums, and church basements to make their selection, a process known as caucusing. But this year, for the first time, Democrats will choose by mail-in ballot over several weeks. Interesting. They won't be caucusing. And you know why that is, right? Because a caucus you can see the results of. You can't fudge a caucus vote because there are people standing there that represent the voters. So that's why the caucuses are so important, because they're really an indelible way to choose a candidate without having to deal with all the messiness of, voting machines and the ways that these contests, these elections can be rigged. And I think so. They will announce the results on March 5th. So this is the Democrats. They will announce the results on March 5th, meaning Iowa's caucuses will no longer be the party's first contest. Across the country, the Democrats are abandoning the traditional caucus. Only Idaho and Wyoming are holding out. Republicans caucus in just 6 other states, aside from Iowa. So I wanted to set that up by showing you what's going on today. But if you were a Bernie Sanders fan, you're going to remember this trip down memory lane. But I want to start before I go into this trip down memory lane. I want to show you Democrats were recently pointing out Trump talking about the caucuses and what's going to happen. And Trump was claiming that the Democrats are going to cheat in this upcoming primary or this upcoming caucus. So watch what he says right here. I'll just show you the clip.
Teach them how to caucus. Take them in your car on caucus night. If you have to do whatever is necessary, we got to get them in. We got to make America great again. So do whatever it takes. If you do, we will win and win big, and that's what you have to do. You know the other side does cheat, and we're not going to let that happen. We cannot let that happen. But that's what we need from you. Get in your car, get a lot of people, and get down and caucus. Give a great speech for me. I hope you will, and I know you will. Have such confidence in you as you had in me and you have in me. Remember, you.
So the way I found this is liberals were like, look at Trump conspiracy theorizing already. He's saying that the Democrats are going to cheat. What's wrong with him? He's a terrible person. Well, let's take a trip down memory lane back to the Bernie Sanders era, shall we? This is an article from, what's the date on this? Hold on a second. The slide is too small for me to see. So the actual date of this publishing was 12/12 of 2020, and the headline says, and Iowa autopsy report, DNC meddling led to Iowa caucus debacle. And that's after an autopsy report. So when I see Biden on TV whining about democracy as if the Democrats are the party of democracy, I have to scoff at that. I mean, you just heard Trump say he wants people to vote, get out there and caucus and all that stuff. He didn't say anything about taking Democrats off the ballot, but that's what they're trying to do to him. So Joe Biden's disingenuous, I guess it's cosplaying or just pearl clutching over democracy is a joke. And this is the proof of that. All you have to do is be able to have a memory that lasts longer than a year or two to know that this is a disingenuous play. So let's read this real quick. Democratic National Committee meddling combined with missteps by the state Democratic Party were the primary drivers of the chaos that torpedoed the Iowa caucuses earlier this year, according to a new audit commissioned by the state party. The report, which was distributed to the Iowa Democratic Party State Central Committee at a meeting Saturday morning and obtained by Politico, identified a series of errors made by the DNC IDP and the technology company contracted by the state party to build a reporting app that collects caucus results. Now you see why they're not having a primary in a caucus in Iowa this year, because they've got it handled. So it's going to be by mail, of course. So next slide here. The February caucuses were overrun by foul-ups. The state party was unable to report a winner on caucus night. Imagine that. on caucus night, a night where literally, and so this is, I just want to take a quick aside here because I remember this so well because I worked for the Bernie campaign, and we had people there to do independent counts, and Bernie clearly won the caucus. And if we hadn't had those people there to do the independent counts, they would have been able to run away with this, it's a programming bug defense very easily. But a lot of us, the people that were at the caucus stood up and went, no. We have tallies on paper. We took the counts. So screw your app, Democrats. But that's how this works. So anyway, they sorry, I skipped ahead, but the backup, let me go back. My bad. I'm still a one-man band here. So the mobile app report results failed to, excuse me. Okay, so let's starting with the mobile app reporting results failed to work for many precinct chairs. The February caucuses were overrun by foul-ups. The state party was unable to report a winner on caucus night. The mobile app to report results failed to work for many precinct chairs because Bernie was winning. The backup telephone systems were jammed, and some precincts had initial reporting errors. The state party chair, Troy Price, resigned in the wake of the debacle, which put Iowa's status as the first nation nominating contest in serious jeopardy. Yeah, so they're going to blame it on the state when it was really them that did it. And this gets into that a little deeper, so let's keep going. But the report pins the blame squarely on the DNC for the heart of the problem on caucus night. The delay in reporting of the results, according to the report, the delay in reporting of results. According to the report, the DNC demanded the technology company Shadow build a conversion tool just weeks before the caucuses to allow the DNC to have real-time access to the raw numbers because the National Party feared the app would miscalculate results. The DNC's data system used a different database format than Shadow's reporting app, which caused multiple problems. That's not suspicious, is it? And we all know what was happening here. They did this so they could put over your boy Pete Buttigieg, because then the press pretended that Pete Buttigieg won as they went into New Hampshire. If you remember, the press went out and declared Pete Buttigieg won the Iowa caucus, even though he clearly did not. Let's keep going. Attempting to graft an entirely new software element onto the back-end reporting system at the proverbial 11th hour is likely always going to be problematic, and it was ultimately the cause of a major problem on caucus night, the report concludes. Furthermore, the IDP, which is the Iowa Democratic Party, were not involved in the development of this tool. The IDP simply permitted the DNC to direct the IDP's vendor. So now you can see clearly what's going on. The Hillary Clinton-run DNC fudged the results of the caucus because Bernie was a non-starter. And at the end of the day, they got their boy Biden in, right? But this was the beginning of the shenanigans. And so when Trump says the other side cheats and liberals clutch their pearls, I have to remind you of this because people's short-term memory is not holding up. The audit states conversion tool had coding errors that spit out inaccurate numbers and caused confusion about the accuracy of the results, eventually leading to delays in reporting, but the state party's app never malfunctioned nor was hacked, the report concludes. So the state party numbers were fine. So moving on to the next slide here. When the DNC database conversion tool failed to work correctly, it caused the DNC to wrongly stop the IDP from reporting its results, and the IDP's entire planned reporting process was thrown into disarray, the report says. The DNC interjection was the catalyst for the resulting chaos in the boiler room and in the IDP's attempts to manually collect and confirm caucus results by hand. If the DNC had not interjected itself into the results reporting process based on its erroneous data conversion, imagine that the DNC had the erroneous data. I'm so shocked. Caucus night could conceivably have proceeded according to the IDP's initial plan. And I'm going to bore you with the rest of this, but The audit was conducted by Bonnie Campbell, the former Attorney General of Iowa, and Fagray Drinker. That's a interesting name for a law firm, an international law firm. The team conducted dozens of interviews with top IDP staffers, employees of Shadow, and representatives from the Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Pete Buttigieg campaigns. I don't know if you remember this or not, but Joe Biden came in 4th in the Iowa caucus when the actual results came out that weren't, stacked by the app. The DNC refused to participate in interviews by the lawyers who conducted the audit. Isn't that interesting? Evaluating the nominating process always happens following the election so that DNC staff can remain focused winning the general election. And this cycle that worked to help contribute to President-elect Biden's historic victory, David Bergstein, a spokesman for the DNC, said in a statement. We got a little bit more of this trip down memory lane here for you. So moving to the next slide. The DNC said it offered to provide written answers so staff could remain focused on the work in the general election. The authors of the report declined that request, the DNC said. Burstein also defended the need for a quality control check, pointing to errors that were discovered in the initial caucus results. He also said Shadow was responsible for the technical issues. That's what they always do. They can blame a third-party contractor for the issues. That's corporate America's number one go-to, we're not responsible defense mechanism. Since 1972, Iowans have held the nation's first presidential nominating contest, a position that has come under attack from Democrats who argue the state's overwhelmingly white population is not representative of the country and therefore should not play an outsized role in the party's nominee. That is just not true. If you've ever been to Des Moines, there is a large black population there. There's also a very large Indian population there. I don't know what the demographics were then, but I was just in Des Moines last year for my grandfather's funeral, and there were a lot of black people there. I didn't grow up, but I spent time in Ames because my parents lived there when I was a child, and I grew up with black people and people of all races in Iowa. So that's bullshit right there. But as you can see, they're not allowing people to vote in the Iowa caucus this year because they know Biden would lose. And this is going to be a recurring theme in the clips I have for you tonight. But racism is the new way to defend against being accountable. They just blame it on racism and go, oh, he's a racist, or that guy's a racist, or an anti-Semite, or whatever you need. It's the new scoundrel's way to defend themselves from criticism. And, this started years ago. Obviously, this is from 4 years ago. So even before the botched caucuses, Democrats were calling on the party to reschedule the nominating order and replace Iowa with more representative states. So, next slide. Biden's emergence as the Democratic nominee, after finishing in a dismal 4th place in the caucuses, served to ding the state's reputation for picking presidents even more. I wonder why. It's Iowa's fault. They didn't pick the sanctioned candidate by the DNC. That's essentially what this article is saying. And then you have their campaign this year is democracy. We have to defend democracy against Trump. Oh, it's so scary. Now, as the DNC and IDP elect new leaders, the fight over the nominating calendar is likely to intensify in the coming months. The audit also faults the IDP for waiting too long to develop the reporting application, which resulted in inadequate training and use. Many precinct chairs were unable to log into the app or faced other technical challenges, leading them to call in their results. So as you see, this whole, we got to protect democracy thing is a complete and total fraud. I want to call it a joke, but it's basically projection. They're telling you that the other party is a threat to democracy as they literally repeal democracy in front of your faces. There is no Democratic Iowa caucus this year. 0. And that is a sad, sad thing. because as we've seen, the guy who is running the country is not running the country. So on this Iowa caucus note, I watched these videos. I watched a recent campaign rally, or it was actually Tim Pool's podcast, but it was a campaign rally for Vivek. And he said a couple things in this that I really liked and enjoyed. And so I wanted to kind of just touch on a couple of them. The first one, well, let's just watch this. So this is the first clip of Vivek I have speaking on Tim Pool's podcast.
Overarching focus on what are called Judeo-Christian values time and time again, and have me as a traditionalist wondering when the other shoe will drop for me and my loved ones.
So I cut this lady's question up, but this is a really good question and a really good answer. This woman is an atheist, and she asks Vivek about, do atheists have a seat at the table? She basically, because his entire campaign is based on truth, and he says that there's one true God and all that stuff. So anyway, listen to this lady's question, which is a great question, and Vivek's response, which Russell Dobler said he thinks Vivek has a lot of political talent. He is 100% correct about that. And they also talked about him being a little bit smarmy and having a little bit of that political vibe. He does have a very Obama kind of sheen to him. He's a very good speaker, and he seems very genuine. I don't want to take anything away from him, but he's also an outsider. So I think he's appealing to a lot of these people. And this is obviously stuff that you're not going to see in the mainstream news in relation to the Iowa caucus. So check this out.
Who are not religious, yet share the same values from a secular viewpoint. I know that your first truth is that God is real, and although I respectfully disagree with that solitary point, I would earnestly like to know if you think it's possible for families with a focus in secular humanism to have a similarly positive experience in religious education, or a place in your movement where one of the tenets of unifying principles stands in direct odds with our religious freedoms.
So it's a great question. I first of all think that the job of the U.S. president is to swear an oath to the Constitution and to keep it. That includes the First Amendment, which includes religious liberty, the freedom of religious exercise, which includes the right not to practice a particular faith either. And so that's squarely the job of the U.S. president. And I think that, there was a lot of thoughtfulness in that question because, yes, I was the lone Hindu student in a Catholic high school in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I did take a lot away.
So he understands a little bit what it's like to be a religious outcast, like a secular atheist would.
From that religious education, despite not converting to Catholicism at the end of it. And so my core belief system is that there's one true God. God puts us here for a purpose. It's our moral duty to realize that purpose, that we're all equal. God works through us in different ways, but we're all equal because God still resides in each
I need to get a clip, by the way, of Beavis and Butthead saying, "You said duty."
of us. That's the heart of my faith, my Hindu faith. I think there's deep compatibility with the values. It's a different faith and a different theology. But the value system, including the Judeo-Christian values that this country was founded on. Now, what do the Ten Commandments say? I read them for the first time in 9th grade. There's one true God. Don't take his name in vain. Observe the Sabbath. Honor your parents. Don't kill, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't covet, broadly.
See, the Ten Commandments gets a little dicey for me too, because honor your parents. Okay, what if your parents are abusing you or sexually abusing you? Then you still honor your parents? No, it's not that simple. It's a little too simple.
In simpler terms, that's what broadly they say. If I, as a Hindu, can certainly find common purpose with those shared values, and I do, and I think those are Judeo-Christian values. I think this nation was, as a historical fact, founded on Judeo-Christian values. Then I believe somebody who has a Kantian.
That is actually not a fact. I've just been reading about the Quakers, and I don't know how much you know about the Quakers, but they are very interesting, and I'm going to go a lot deeper into that on another show. But I'm reading about the Quakers in Voltaire, and I didn't realize that William Penn, the guy who founded Pennsylvania, was actually kind of seen as a enemy of the Anglican Church in England. And anyway, that's a total aside. Let's keep listening.
Worldview, or pick your favorite secular ordering can also find common cause with those values. I believe it's easier to arrive at those values just mentally if you anchor yourself grounded in God. I think it's actually a lot harder to get there through secular worldviews. If you want to follow, Immanuel.
Wondering
I
when the other
disagree,
shoe will
but
drop for me and my
sorry.
loved ones who
I always
Name
do
in
that.
vain. Observe the Sabbath. Honor. If I, as a Hindu, can certainly find common purpose with those shared values, and I do, and I think those are Judeo-Christian values, can also find common cause with those values. I believe it's easier to arrive at those values just mentally if you anchor yourself grounded in God. I think it's actually a lot harder to get there through secular worldviews. If you want to follow, Immanuel Kant or whoever else, I think it's a harder path. But to answer your question, can somebody who is...
That's it. Immanuel Kant is a very intellectual reference. Cheers to you for that, Vivek.
secular, non-religious, agnostic, or atheist still find common cause with the shared value set that this country was founded on? Absolutely. And even more, even if you disagree with some of those values, do you have the right to live in this country? And are you still protected by the same constitutional rights? The answer to that is also absolutely yes in the United States of America. And that's what it means not to run for pastor. And I would be...
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I was forced to memorize this shit in school, and I'm surprised that a lot more people don't know these things.
Certainly an odd choice to run for pastor of a Christian church, but that's not the job of the U.S. president. The job of the U.S. president is to swear an oath to the Constitution and to keep it. I mean, as far as I know, one of our conversations, I mean, Steve is a Christian. Eddie, you're a pastor? You're a minister. And I think that we're
this guy
not
here, right, that he's pointing to too, is a
of-
black man who's an Iowa representative. So this idea from that article about the caucuses that Iowa's a completely white state is not true.
our role to join the ministry together, but out of our shared commitment to the Constitution. And so the answer to your question is yes. And I am sharing with you always what my true convictions are. We are one nation under God. It's part of our creed. I think part of what's happened in this country is we've turned God into a four-letter word, which I don't think should actually is good for our culture. I don't think it's good for kids. I don't think it's good for national unity. But that doesn't mean that if you're an...
One of the things these people always neglect to mention is like the Crusades or the Inquisition or all of the terrible things that religion has done as well. Now, I'm not discounting that religion does a lot of good in the world. It does. But there's a darker side to it. Catholic priests molesting kids, like en masse.
atheist, somehow you're not welcome in this country. I think that as long as you share the shared commitments to the Constitution, you're still an American, and that's what matters. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I love that. I mean, that is something you will not see. That's a Republican saying that, you know, there's no debate happening on the Democratic side, obviously, but it's, to me, it's encouraging to see that level of intellectualism and debate happening on the Republican side. You know what I mean? Know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? So this next clip is Vivek, and this one's an interesting one because he's talking. So this one's really interesting because what happens is this guy comes up and he basically says, I want to vote for Trump, but I like you a lot. What can you kind of say? I'll just let you see the question. But he basically asks him why he should vote for Vivek over Trump. And Vivek's answer is actually really good. I was really impressed with this. On Russell's comment about Vivek's political talent, this is pretty damn good.
Hey, Ryan. There you go. So I followed your campaign since basically the beginning, and I love your message. I think you could fix this country. We've seen what they've done going after Donald Trump. Indictments, even trying to remove him from the ballot in certain states. My question is, how do I vote for Vivek Ramaswamy without sending the message that I am okay with what they are doing to Donald Trump?
Very good question.
I think your question weighs on the minds of a lot of people I met today. What I saw in many of the rooms I was in was a sense of struggle with that question of loyalty. And I think our loyalty, my loyalty, and I know Donald Trump's loyalty and the loyalty of the people participating in this caucus process is to this country. So the question is what's right for the country. Let's just agree with that. Whoever you're going to vote for, that's what matters here. Not loyalty to me, not loyalty to Trump. It's loyalty to the United States of America. I think you have, if you want to, I'm going to be blunt about this. I think if you want to save Trump and save this country, a vote for me is actually the way to go. What they're doing to Donald Trump is wrong. I have stood up against it at every step of this process, to the point of derision, to the point of people have had all kinds of conspiracy theories about me, but one of them, and more popular ones, is there's some kind of Trump plant, that Trump and I had some kind of deal early on in this campaign to somehow eliminate Ron DeSantis, as though this was a worthy goal for a guy who's got other things to do in life than to focus on eliminating Ron DeSantis from contention. No, that was ridiculous. But I'm saying that I've been so strongly supportive.
I had never heard
of
that,
Donald
by the
Trump
way.
in the face of these prosecutions that even many people circulated nonsense like this. I've stood up against, I went to the Miami courthouse, I've stood up against these persecutions. For God's sake, I have actually written a FOIA demand and submitted it, Freedom of Information Act request, to know what Biden told Jack Smith, what Merrick Garland told Jack Smith, followed through on that, taken legal steps, and I hope we get accountability. I think that I wasn't planning on announcing this tonight, but might as well just say it. I think tomorrow morning, if not by noon, by tomorrow morning in the next 48 hours, I am submitting an amicus brief to the Supreme Court, arguing for why they need to overturn Colorado's disastrous decision to try to keep Donald Trump off the ballot, because it's the right thing to do for this country.
See, that's so smart, because even if he loses, he's positioning himself for a position in Trump's cabinet. There's all kinds of different ways he can go by just kind of like pandering to the MAGA base. He's smart enough to know that the Nikki Haley's and the Ron DeSantis's, the people that the media is clearly putting over. I mean, when I did a search today for the Iowa caucus on Google, I saw a couple articles from the mainstream media about like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are clear favorites for the Republican primary. That's how they do this. They program you. They do it. The Democrats have done it for years. They pretend like the guy you really want to vote for isn't a good choice and isn't going to win, and kind of force you into like a Joe Biden camp. He's the one that can actually beat Trump, that kind of nonsense. I think this is a very smart answer from Vivek. Let him finish.
And as somebody who's been trained in the law, I feel like a sense of obligation to do that. If somebody who understands the Constitution, it's my belief that every other Republican, myself included, needs to withdraw from any ballot that forcibly withdraws Donald Trump from the primary ballot, because that's how you actually stop the brazen election interference in our own primary. If every other Republican nullifies Maine, then it has no impact.
That is honestly absolutely brilliant too.
Steps, and I hope somebody who's been trained in the law, I feel like a sense of obligation to do that. The length to which I've gone, and so people know this about me when I'm saying this. At this point, it is my firm conviction that this system, which has ratcheted up the threat level one by one to eliminating Donald Trump from the ballot, will stop at nothing. I'm increasingly certain will stop at nothing.
I mean, look at what they did to Bernie. They threw everything at him. And that's the thing that I think a lot of liberals or lefties missed in the general election. There were I think very few Bernie people went to the Trump camp in 2016. But in 2020, I think that a lot of the Bernie people, myself included, were so angry with the Democrats for nixing his candidacy. He was clearly the most popular guy in the race. He was filling stadiums full of people. Biden could barely get people in a high school. So there were clearly shenanigans involved there. And the Democratic caucus issue proves it. And since that happened, and since they got busted in the last election cycle, they're not even having a caucus this year. Anyway.
To keep this man away from the White House. So I think the best way to literally save Trump is to at least have arguably somebody the system might actually, even some elements of it, prefer less than Donald Trump for what I'm bringing to Washington, D.C.
That is such a good
And
argument.
I think that's also what this country requires. I think they duped him at many steps. They told him you can't fire those civil service bureaucrats because of so-called civil service protections. Read the law. Those civil service protections do not apply.
The conspiracy theorist in me is like, Vivek planted that guy and pre-wrote this question and answer, because holy shit, that's a great question and a great answer. And that's the one hurdle that he has in this election, or this primary, is he is the thanks, Ellen, by the way, for the props. Ellen, I see you all the time. Just to take a moment, I just looked at the comments. Ellen saying I'm not bored. Thank you for the kind words. And I'm honored to have you as a viewer, Ellen. I see you interacting with Keaton and Russ on Due Dissidence, and I'm sure you're a viewer of all these other channels. So thank you. And anyway, back to Vivek. I really have to wonder if this question isn't a plant, because it's just too good of a question and too good of an answer. And the hurdles that he has to clear in this primary are Trump voters. And that's the one question that they all have. How can I vote for you without saying I'm okay with what they're doing to Trump? You know, I think a lot of people want to vote for Trump just because they can see what the establishment media and political class are doing to him. So now this is where things get a little interesting. And, you know, we can agree or disagree on this. This is a controversial subject, but I actually kind of liked, there are elements of it I don't love, but they bring up the transgender issue. And these guys are all right wingers. Candace Owens is at the table. And I didn't clip any of Candace Owens' talking points or any of her answers to questions or anything. But there's a point in this next clip where she kind of side-eyes Vivek, and you'll see why. But he's very scientific about this gender thing. And even if you disagree with him, which I do to some extent, you should listen to what he has to say, because I think that the views of right-wingers on the gender issue have been widely misconstrued. I don't think they're that radical. I really don't. And you'll hear why here. Now, you can agree or disagree with them. A lot of them are very religiously driven, which I'm not religious, so I don't have any of these predisposed ideas about gender or any of that stuff. But listen to what Vivek says here, because I think this is another good question.
Legal mechanics and just as a matter of policy, what we want in this country. If you're not 18 years old, you should not be getting any chemical castration or genital mutilation, just as you can't get a tattoo, just as you can't have an addictive drink of alcohol. And so my view is we do live in a free country. If you're an adult, a fully grown adult, you're free to dress how you want. You're free how to identify how you want, as long as you're not harming anybody else. Don't expect to change the way we compete in women's sports. Don't expect to change the way we label our bathrooms, to change our language. But if you want to live your life the way you want, as long as you're not hurting somebody else with a presumptive expectation that the rest of society bends to your delusion, you're free to do so.
Now, let's just pause there for a second, because that is the radical right wing, the far right. That's what Vivek is being called, a far right. That is the far right view on this. We're fine with you being transgender, but we're not going to let kids be castrated and mutilated until they're old enough to make the decision on their own. If that's what they want to do. Because as you know, if you've been around kids, they're still growing. I mean, my son played with girl dolls when he was little, and he's the straightest kid there is now that he's, going through puberty. So there is validity to this, despite people wanting to just call it bigotry or racism. These people have valid concerns. And if you listen to the way Vivek talks about this issue, he's clearly not hateful. He's clearly not like, gay people. He's not, this is not the Republican Party of, even the 1990s. Because as you'll see in this later clip, I have a banger of a segment coming up of a debate between David Frum and Steve Bannon. And this is the point where you see the party switch again, because David Frum, the goddamn Bush speechwriter who came up with the axis of evil thing, is arguing the liberal side against Steve Bannon. So the populism has forced the parties to swap, because the Democrats have the power. So the donors and the state the deep state, whatever you want to call them, permanent Washington, the people that make money running campaigns and doing all this stuff, the people that work at NGOs, they do not want these insurgents in the Republican Party to prevail, because they will actually change things. They want, and anyway, I got way off the rails there, but listen, this is the point I was getting back around to is the Republican Party of today is not the party that people think it is. It's and Vivek's answer here, I think, proves that. It's a very sensible and rational answer. And listen, he goes further into genetic science here, which is something that I think only he's one of the few candidates who's qualified to do it, because he was like a biotech CEO or whatever, which is also suspect. But hey, I think someone said it earlier. It's kind of like when you're in the position that we're in late stage capitalism, maybe it's going to take these billionaire types who have views outside the mainstream to come in and actually fight the power in an effective way, because they have the resources and the backing to do so. But listen to what he says on this transit. Well, I'll stop this again because Tim Pool actually says some stuff too. But listen to their diatribe here on transgender and transgenderism and that kind of thing.
But kids aren't the same as adults. And so I think protecting children is a policy position we've already well accepted in this country. And so the same logic and the same mechanism we use to prevent you from drinking by the age of 21, that we prevent you from getting a tattoo by the age of 18, you should not be undergoing genital mutilation or chemical castration as a minor in this country. And I think there's a pretty broad consensus around that.
And I want to add to this. I think it's interesting because when it comes to the issue of drinking, you can have a drink at the age of 21 and be fine. You can have a drink at the age of 31 and be fine. It's alcoholism that's bad. But if at the age of 21 you decide to undergo permanent and irreversible surgery and that was a mistake, you can't come back from that.
That's right.
So there is a serious challenge in how we deal with an issue like this, because I don't want people to take their lives. I think that's horrifying. But we did have a guest on this show who said that she thought she was a man. She believed the gender ideology she was being fed on the internet. And she talked to, I think she said she talked to her brother.
See, and this is where it gets a little dicey, because some of these guys get real conspiratorial, like there's a gender ideology push, and they break it down in this, and this is what I've said as well. I think you always follow the money on this stuff. There is money in hormone therapy. There's pharmaceutical money in that industry. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that they are pushing through media and that kind of stuff this thought process for the sake of profit, not for any other reason. Some people say, oh, it's to depopulate or it's to turn us all gay or whatever. No, it's all about money. It's always about money.
And he said, get your hormones checked first. You likely have a hormone imbalance. So instead of adopting the gender ideology and taking testosterone, when she went to the doctor and got her hormones checked, it turns out that she did have a hormone imbalance. So they prescribed her female hormones. She said almost instantly gender dysphoria disappeared and she was in alignment with her own body.
Yeah.
And so my concern is if someone like that were to undergo a surgery and then regret it later, I'm not going to pretend to know what a doctor.
Can I also just say one word about this? I don't know this person or this individual, but there is a really small number of.
Listen to this.
So I say there are two genders, and it's a clear point.
And watch.
There is a small number of people in the general population who have.
As he breaks this down, watch when they cut to Candace Owens. It's hilarious the look she gives him, because this is clearly something that she's very she is kind of a little bigoted about, if I'm being honest. But watch her face when they cut to her. Hilarious.
Chromosomal abnormalities. So we have, 23 pairs of chromosomes. 2 of them are sex chromosomes. One is X and Y if you're a man, X and X if you're a woman. But there are some people who are born with XYY or XXY, and that's like a real thing. That's grounded in truth. It's not made up. It's in your genetics. One is called Klinefelter syndrome. One is called Jacob syndrome. These are exceedingly rare. We're talking about.
So he is laying out a scientific genetic case here for transgenderism.
About 1 in thousands at a much lower rate. So in those particular cases, yes, those are instances of what you will call intersex, which is a different phenomenon than trans. But what's happened is, let's take those rare cases to one side. And I don't know if this person you had here had such a thing or not. I would have said, not just go check your hormones, go actually get a genetic test and actually understand, are you one of the rare people with one of these chromosomal abnormalities? It's inborn. But for the purpose of this discussion in our modern politics, I don't think that this pertains to public policy.
I'll go you one further and give you my hot take on this. I think that gay people are more evolved than straight people. I think that gay and that lifestyle is another step in evolution, and evolution happens slowly, but as the world becomes more populated, and there are scientific studies that show this in like mice population, as the mice populations get larger, there are more instances of homosexuality in mice communities, and it's nature's way of controlling population growth. But I also, like I said, I think it's a genetic evolution. It really is. And there's genetic proof of gay people. You can tell there are genetic signs for it. So it's not something that people just choose to do. Although I would admit there are probably some people that do choose to do it. But overall, and he's laying it out for you right here, there are genetic mutations that cause homosexuality or transgenderism even.
Take that off the table. That exists, and we're going to acknowledge that. That's like a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the population. It's always existed. It's a chromosomal abnormality. For the rest of people,
Chromosomal abnormality.
Transgenderism, the belief that your gender does not match your biological sex, that if you're XX but you believe you're a man, it is a mental health disorder. And it needs to be treated as a mental health disorder through mental.
Now, this is where he loses the left. But I think before you close your mind to what they're talking about here, listen to what they say about mental health. And this is one of the main reasons I pulled this clip, is he actually advocates for bringing back mental health coverage in health insurance and mental health institutions. And this is an issue, I just want to take a quick aside from this, that I'm very passionate about, because my grandmother worked in a mental health institution, and my grandmother was insanely liberal in the 80s and 90s. I grew up with her. It's probably one of the reasons I'm so political. But my grandmother hated Ronald Reagan for closing the mental institutions. First of all, because she lost her job. But second of all, because it put mentally ill people in the streets. I drive through LA all the time. I can guarantee you 90% of the homeless people in Los Angeles are mentally ill. They're yelling at parking meters. They're doing things. I saw a guy swinging a club at like nothing in downtown the other day. They're mentally ill. They need help. They're not going to get a job at McDonald's and pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So to hear again these kind of things coming from a Republican candidate is so refreshing and so evident of how the parties have completely switched sides. And we're going to go deep on that in a few minutes. My last segment, if you're watching, stick around because it's a banger, and it's some great clips. But anyway, let's keep listening to Vivek here, because I want you to hear what he has to say.
Mental health care, which often isn't covered by private health insurance. A lot of this is through pharmaceutical intervention. They prefer pill-pushing behaviors as an alternative.
There it is right there, the money thing. And that, I think, is why this is being pushed, not because, of kids that are in danger or whatever, like, all the flowery reasons they give you for it. It's money. It's because of money, because they can sell hormone treatment. Pharmaceutical companies can sell hormone treatments. It's a new market. It's an emerging market.
Or people who run surgery centers prefer surgery, peddling surgery as an alternative. This is a mental health condition. And once we see it that way, we realize the compassionate thing to do is from a standpoint, because I think we've gotten put into this box of being somehow antipathic because of adopting this set of views that I think seems like most of us share. I don't think the compassionate thing to do for that kid is to affirm that kid's confusion. That's not compassion. That is cruelty. And I think we should actually feel that. It shouldn't be just a thing we say. We should acknowledge that and act with the compassion and say that kid's going through a struggle. Help the kid get through the struggle. That's what we should be doing, not surgically operating on them and chemically castrating.
So liberals, how can you argue with that? He's saying if a kid is going through a struggle, we want to help them through the struggle, not tell them they're bad people or that they're wrong even. Just help them through the struggle. Maybe they discover that they are gender fluid or transgender. Then once they're an adult, they can get that surgery. But I don't think that their position on this issue is by any means irrational or bigoted. I think it's very sensible.
Them.
You pointed out that it is a mental health disorder. It is listed in the DSM-5 as a mental health disorder. This is an academic statement. This is not meant to be invective.
Yeah.
But there
and Tim is very hateful of anything the left is good with. So, I'm going to give him a pass on that. But I don't think he says anything too out of
There are
line.
many people that I speak with who are liberal or Democrat that get offended when I point out the fact that it is listed in the DSM-5 as a mental health disorder. And my argument is there's another mental health disorder called pica. Are you familiar with this?
No.
It's where people eat things that aren't food. We don't affirm these things. We try to help these people, because I agree with you, as you said, to tell someone eating pennies is something they should do is cruelty to them.
See, I think that one of the things I would say if I was talking to someone on the
But
left
that's
on this who
different,
finds that
Tim. I mean, someone who's gay, openly gay, like it's there's so much more nuance than that.
offensive isn't that really stigmatizing mental health disorder? To say that you consider it so offensive to have a mental health disorder that should trigger the fact that you have a mental health condition. To say that that's in such a category that it is so offensive that you said such a thing about me. I think the compassionate thing to do is actually recognize that there are many Americans who go through a lot, especially now more than even 30.
So he's trying to make it out that like people who are offended by calling, people who think they're transgender or gay, or people who are transgender or gay, a mental health disorder is derogatory towards people with mental health disorders. No, Vivek, you're a little misguided on that one. I think people are offended that you're calling their lifestyle a mental health disorder. It's not a mental health disorder. People are born gay. You just said it yourself. You just laid out the scientific case for it. So this is where these guys lose me just a little bit. But I think overall their position, like I said, for the Republican Party, the conservatives, the party that has the religious right, is a lot less bigoted and crazy than people make it out to be.
40 years
I'll
ago,
leave it
social
at
media
that.
and otherwise playing the loss of purpose, the loss of faith. We can go deeper on that. Yes, there are all kinds of mental health conditions that are rampant in the United States of America today. We should have.
And I'm going to stop there with that. So anyway, the whole point of that was just to show you that, first of all, the idea that democracy is on the ballot is a joke. And second of all, Vivek makes some good points. And I think that he's being largely overlooked, especially by the mainstream media in the Iowa caucus. I think he's going to do well. Based on what I've seen, he's been on the ground in Iowa shaking hands and talking to people. And people, that is a whole room full of a lot of white guys. And I'm sure that's what they were aiming for. But they're all there for Vivek. So, I mean, call them racists, call them MAGA racists, whatever you want. I mean, it's looking like the Republican Party this cycle has some pretty diverse candidates. Despite what you think about Nikki Haley, I don't think highly of her, but she's a woman of color, and so this is the political evolution of our system too. And like I said, we're going to get into it a little bit more in a few minutes, the great party switch. But before that, I think I'm going to cut a segment and go right into propaganda. So I have this whole piece about Lady Gaga. Okay. And I don't know if you saw this or not. This is kind of old news, but I wanted to cover it. I call her Lady Pharma now because she did a full-on commercial for a pharma company. And I happened to be, at the gym the other day and catch this on TV because I don't watch mainstream TV really. And I happened to see a Lady Gaga pharma ad. And so let's just read this piece real quick from page 6, and then I'll show you the ad. Lady Gaga slammed over a cringy ad for migraine drug. You don't need money this badly. Yeah, I would agree with that. So this is what they have to say about it. Lady Gaga is facing criticism after teaming up with Pfizer to promote the migraine drug Nurtec. The singer's paid partnership with the pharmaceutical giant was met with a harsh response from fans who slammed the cringy ad and accused Gaga of selling out for money. Girl, what the hell happened to you that you're like this and care about money this way and nothing else anymore? Not the person who used to say, I effing hate money in 2009, one person commented. WTF is wrong with this account? Where is Gaga? Who's doing this? How come our mother monster would do a sponsor for blank medicine? This is insane. Another added. So obviously they pulled these kind of dumb comments from social media to make it look like only dumb people really have a problem with this. But let's watch the ad real quick so you can see it. It is, as the headline alluded to, pretty cringy. I will admit that. Here you go.
Through pain. If you're like me, one of the millions suffering from pain caused by migraine, Nurtec ODT may help. It's the only medication that can treat a migraine when it strikes and prevent migraine attacks. Treat and prevent all in one.
Don't take if allergic to Nurtec. Allergic reactions can occur even days after using. Most common side effects were nausea, indigestion, and stomach pain.
Relief is possible. Talk to a doctor about Nurtec ODT.
My favorite part of any pharma ad is when they list the side effects at the end. Oh my God, that's so good. In fact, I used to perform under a DJ handle, DJ Side Effects, and I would cut in pharma clips like from the side effects ad, the side effects list at the end, because I thought they were so funny. Some were like suicidal thoughts or like sudden urge to gamble. Like, what? This drug gives me the sudden urge to gamble? This is insane. That's worse than the original problem I had. But I think what I wanted to comment on with this piece is it's a different time for artists. So if you know the comedian Bill Hicks, he has a whole bit about how if you do a commercial, you're off the artistic roll call forever. And he really calls out Jay Leno, who was a comedian who in the 90s did Doritos commercials. And, whatever you want to say about Jay Leno, I actually like Jay Leno quite a bit. I think he's a good man. And I loved The Tonight Show when I was a kid. But Bill Hicks was kind of doing political commentary in the sense that he was saying that, once you cross that line, how can people trust your art anymore? And with Lady Gaga, it's like, I love a lot of her early stuff. I was a big fan, call me whatever you want, but I dug a lot of her early, I like pop music, so kill me, call me stupid, whatever you want. A great song is a great song. And when I saw this, I just went like, holy crap. Not that she maybe doesn't need the money, and I would say with regards to the Bill Hicks comments about if you do a commercial, you're off the artistic roll call forever. And then, the joke in his bit is about Willie Nelson. He's like, except Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson had all these tax problems. And then he did a commercial for Taco Bell. And, Bill does this little song. He's like, oh, I'm singing for the woman in the rose tattoo. My butt is so loose. Taco Bell is good for you. It's a great bit if you haven't heard it. But I had always said this, back in Bill's day, I think that held very true. But in today's world, it's so difficult. You can't sell records anymore as an artist. So I'll give some artists a pass who license their music to video games or, do commercials at some point or allow their music to be licensed to a commercial. But this is just, wow. This is another level. Let's watch this again real quick. I mean, just
what it's like to perform through pain. If you're like me, one of the millions suffering from pain caused by migraine, Nurtec ODT may help. It's the only medication that can treat a migraine when it strikes and prevent migraine attacks. Treat and prevent all in one.
Don't take if allergic to Nurtec. Allergic reactions can occur even days after using. Most common side effects were nausea, indigestion, and stomach pain.
Relief is possible. Talk to a doctor about Nurtec ODT.
I'm sure she got paid well for that, and I hope it was worth it, Lady Gaga, because that's very sad. That's very, very sad. And I mean, not to single her out, because I think it's just most shocking from her. A lot of other artists I saw Pink did a pharmaceutical commercial too. A lot of them are doing it now because that the world changed because of COVID. Safe and effective. Anyway, speaking of cartoonish propaganda, let's move to our next segment. This is a tweet from your boy Nick Cruz about the recent propaganda about Hamas rapes. And Nick says so eloquently, did you guys know that hundreds of Hamas soldiers died during October 7th? You know, there were Apache helicopters raining hellfire indiscriminately above during October 7th, which killed many Israelis, by the way. Despite this chaos, mass death, and how dangerous this was for Hamas, Zionists would have you believe they paused combat in order to commit mass rape with Apache helicopters and the IDF shooting at them. Who believes this stupid shit? Well said, Nick. Very, very well said. And Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, two of my all-time favorite journalists, recently did a kind of breakdown about this exact propaganda in the New York Times. And I didn't clip a whole bunch of this segment, but I want you to see this real quick because they really, really lay it out. If I have the here it is. Here it is. I always lose these clips. I need to name them better.
Addressing that after so many debunked Israeli claims, the dozens of beheaded babies, the baby burned in an oven, the baby cut out of a woman's fetus, the fetus cut out of the womb. Now Israel and its supporters are really doubling down on these claims of mass rape by militants on October 7th. And we pointed out a lot of the inconsistencies in those stories, but it persists.
Nick just pointed them out.
The Biden administration has really tried to push it as well. They've made a thing out of it. Hillary Clinton came out and made a thing out of it. CNN, Jake Tapper has tried to make a thing out of it. And now the New York Times has come out with a new story that people who buy into Israeli claims are really promoting, that making the claim that Hamas used sexual violence as a tool of war, that there was a deliberate effort to use sexual violence as a tool of war on October 7th. But once again, people are overlooking the countervailing evidence and the inconsistencies even inside this own story, including the very quiet acknowledgement. And this is what a lot of the story is about. It's basically an elaborate effort to justify the fact that there's no physical evidence.
Yeah.
And also no testimony still.
So
that's what the story basically is.
Screams without words. I mean, that's a quote from an eyewitness who actually wasn't an eyewitness. But it's kind of like, we don't have the words, so we're just going to hear the screams anyway by generating enough innuendo to make you believe that this actually took place. And you really have to harbor a lot of academics would call it Orientalist anti-Arab racism to believe that all this was true. This narrative, it's like the Central Park Five for pantsuit feminists and pussy hat liberals who think that Arab men are just like these savages who could actually storm into another country or storm through some border in a military operation and just stop in the middle of an intense confrontation with a powerful military and stand in a circle around a woman and start gang raping her and cutting her breasts off and playing with them, because those are the testimonies contained in this article. But as you said, Aaron, the article by Jeffrey Gettleman, who is just like notorious for these kinds of pieces about Africa and other places, it blames the lack of forensic evidence, the complete absence of any forensic evidence on Jewish burial rituals. Basically, the Jews bury their dead too quickly in 24 hours. So we just couldn't get at any of these bodies. So we're just going to go off of all these weird testimonies from dubious individuals who were supplied to Jeffrey Gettleman and Anat Schwartz and Adam Sella by the Israeli government, because this is not Me Too. Me Too was like a fairly organic thing. Maybe there'd be a group of like 3 or 5 women who would get together in a workplace to accuse the boss. But this is a statewide conspiracy to justify a genocidal assault on an occupied people as international support falters. And it happened 2 months. It really cohered 2 months after the assault began. So I don't know. Do you want to go through some of the key claims here, or how should we do this?
So you should watch that whole stream because they go into the weeds on who the sources are and all that stuff. But we all know that the New York Times is full of shit. I still read the New York Times sometimes, but they totally missed the Nord Stream thing. They let us into the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the Ukraine, they've lied about everything. And just to put a cherry on that, I want to take a little trip down memory lane about another racist hit piece that the New York Times did to promote, the U.S. involvement with squashing ISIS back during the Obama years. But the New York Times did a piece called Caliphate, and they had to retract it. It was an entire podcast. And so let me just walk you through this real quick, just to like ice this cake of New York Times bullshit. New York Times retracts core of hit podcast series Caliphate on ISIS. This is from December 10th of 2020. So this is a very recent example of how terrible the New York Times is, right? So let me just read this to you real quick. The New York Times has retracted one, and this is from NPR, by the way. The New York Times has retracted one of its core hit 2018 podcast series Caliphate after an internal review found the paper failed to heed red flags indicating that the man it relied upon for its narrative about the allure of terrorism could not be trusted to tell the truth. The newspaper has reassigned its star terrorism reporter, Rukmini Callimachi, who hosted the series. So it's just like when Catholic priests molest kids, they don't get fired, they get reassigned. When people lie in the New York Times, they don't get fired, they just get reassigned to the Israel division or whatever they're doing these days. Moving on. Canadian authorities this fall accused the man Shiroz Chowdhury of lying about those activities. He currently faces criminal charges in federal court in Ontario of perpetrating a terrorism hoax. We fell in love with the fact that we had gotten a member of ISIS who would describe his life in the caliphate and would describe his crimes. New York Times executive editor Dean Beckett tells NPR. Dean Beckett, by the way, is the guy who ran the Trump-Russia thing. And they actually did an entire documentary called The Fourth Wall about them covering, the New York Times intense coverage of Trump-Russia collusion, which was a complete hoax. So it's not a surprise that, this was another piece that they were running around that same time. Anyway, Dean Beckett tells the NPR in an interview on Thursday, I think we were so in love with it that when we saw the evidence that maybe it was a fabulist, when we saw evidence that he was making some of it up, we didn't listen hard enough. God damn it. The exact same thing they did with the Trump stories. Well, we just wanted to believe that he was Putin's puppet, so we just kept publishing it. We were in love with it. Oh my God. How do people take the New York Times seriously anymore? Anyone that really thinks the New York Times is a very credible, decent source of news is very naive. Very naive. The highly produced series was announced to much fanfare in March of 2018 at the South by Southwest conference in Austin, Texas, as a worthy complement to the paper's hit news podcast, The Daily. So they're at South by Southwest with all their hipster buddies, like, yo, we got this great story about Muslim terror. I can't wait to show it to you. And it was all fake. So that's the kind of world we live in, where the New York Times just runs cartoonish propaganda. And it's not just the New York Times. Just to ice this off with one last little piece of info for you. This guy, Alan McLeod, he was banned from Twitter the other day I think it was for posting this. But basically what he's saying here is, not mentioned here by the Daily Mail, is that these 4 girls, in quotation marks, are all IDF soldiers, not innocent children. Shocking and ridiculous propaganda. So you see the lengths that these people will go to hold on to the narrative. And that's one of the reasons that, it looks like my YouTube stream's on. So, I mean, I'm playing stuff that's all public knowledge and been on YouTube, but if anything ever does get shut off, I'm over on Rumble, just rumble.com/POLYTICKS Polyticks. So anyway, I just wanted to show you just the cartoonish propaganda around what's going on, and thank God for voices like Max and Aaron, who are brave enough. I mean, they just have gigantic balls, and they need to be praised on every level, because there are podcasts that are discussing this news, and those guys are out there in the field reporting on it, and without them, no one would be discussing it. So thank you, Max. Thank you, Aaron. Love you guys. And let's move to the next segment, shall we? So the next segment, we continue with our theme of cartoonish propaganda. And I had to, this is another Max and Aaron clip. Actually, it's Aaron and Matt Taibbi, but this made me laugh so hard. And it kind of dovetails with the final segment of the night, which is David Frum versus Steve Bannon. But I want to show you this just because it's hilarious, first of all, but also because it's another example of the cartoonish propaganda that has ruled our lives for the past, several years. I mean, at this point, I question everything, even stuff that I was told before I realized all this was, a prefabricated TV show. But anyway, watch this. This is absolutely incredible.
This solemn occasion.
So this
I'm gonna
is,
try to get,
since I didn't clip the part where they set it up, this is a guy who I guess worked for the Capitol Police, who wrote a book he's selling about January 6th, appearing on MSNBC with Jonathan Capehart.
I'm going to try to get through this. Thank you for what you did 3 years ago today. Please tell me your thoughts on this third anniversary.
And don't call me Shirley.
I'm sorry, I didn't set this up properly. So Jonathan Capehart is interviewing a man named Michael Fanone, who is a former DC police officer who was there on January 6th. And just being in Michael Fanone's presence as Michael Fanone is hawking his new book on January 6th, which I'm sure will do well with the MSNBC audience. Jonathan Capehart is reduced to tears. That's how emotional he is over this.
Surely you can't be serious.
Can we watch it like over and over again? That one
Let's
moment.
do one more time. Yeah, why not? Why not?
I'm going to try to get through this. Thank you for what you did 3 years ago today. Please tell me your thoughts on this third anniversary.
Thank you for what you did 3 years ago, whatever he did, and now writing a memoir trying to profit off of it as a liberal hero.
So as an addendum to this segment, I want to show you this clip from our next segment, which is about a debate between Steve Bannon and David Frum. But watch this clip I pulled of David Frum giving the game away on really January 6th. This is from 2018, but listen to what he says. Listen closely to what David Frum says right here.
On Tuesday. And if they lose badly, it's not going to be because of the left, whatever that means. It's not because of the 50 Antifa black mask guys who roam around the United States breaking windows and committing mayhem, most of whom are probably paid police informers.
Did you hear that? Let's hear that again. Most of whom are what, David?
Trump and the Republicans lose Antifa black mask guys who roam around the United States breaking windows and committing mayhem, most of whom are probably paid police informers.
What's that again?
Breaking windows and committing mayhem, most of whom are probably paid police informers.
Most of whom are probably paid police informers. Interesting. So when you see this guys in the corporate media crying crocodile tears like Jonathan Capehart there to help sell I wonder if he got like a kickback for that or something. I wonder if that guy paid him to do that to help sell books, maybe. I don't know. Whatever the case, these people are snake oil salesmen and hucksters, and the ultimate in projection. The stuff that they, again, the idea that the Trump movement or the MAGA movement is a quote unquote threat to democracy is is just on its face patently ridiculous when you see everything the Democrats are doing. I just covered how there will be no Democratic Iowa caucus and reminded you how the Democratic Party intentionally screwed the Iowa caucus when they knew Bernie was going to win it. And now they're fighting tooth and nail to keep Trump off the ballot. I just got a text message from the Green Party earlier. They fought in previous years to keep the Green Party off the ballot. So just the fact that they're campaigning now on we got to save democracy is just, it's just, I wish I had that clip of Tony Soprano saying, what gives you the balls? Really, that takes some gigantic balls, guys. I mean, you have to really assume that people are just absolutely dumb as bricks to make that work this year, to make the Trump, especially after he was president for 4 years and all the crazy stuff you said never materialized. It just ended up being, 4 years of the press collectively whining and throwing a tantrum. And the economy, like, kind of, I'm not, Trump talks himself up like he's some genius that fixed everything in America. He definitely didn't. He didn't do anywhere near that. And let's be honest, there were forces at work against him, but things were relatively normal. They have gotten steadily worse under Biden. So the idea that it's clear why they want to run on the, this is a threat to democracy shit, because it's really all they have. So anyway, this last segment is, let me explain this for you. So I happened to find a video of a monk debate from 2018 between David Frum and Steve Bannon during basically right before the midterms in the Trump administration. And I think this is the best evidence I could show you lefties that the Democratic Party is now the Republican Party, and the actual route to some kind of semblance of sanity are the extremists in the Republican Party today, because the libertarian people like Matt Gaetz and Thomas Massie are the people that are the populists. They're actually, I might not agree with their stance on gun rights. I might not agree with their stance on abortion, but a lot of those battles have already been fought and will probably continue to be fought in the courts. Where they're right is on censorship and free speech and these issues that, and so much other stuff, populism in general. You're gonna hear Steve Bannon here talk, and I obviously selectively took clips from this because there are points when Steve Bannon in this debate makes arguments for Trump that I think are ridiculous. And this is what's crazy about this. The audience, when you watch this, it's so clear how propagandized people were about Trump. Because when you see the audience visceral reaction just to Steve Bannon's presence, they know nothing about him other than the TV told them he was a racist. And he actually, at the end of this debate, wins them over. If you watch the full debate, I'll put a link to it in the description after the stream, but he actually wins the audience over to his side way of thinking, despite there being people protesting him and laughing at him throughout the course of it. And he comes out, and at the end of it, he's such a gentleman. You can hear him lean into David Frum, and he's like, I'm honored to be on this stage with you, So Steve Bannon throughout this looks like a class act. And anyway, I'll shut up now and play the clips. But I think you're really going to enjoy this, because I love stuff like this that shifts my perspective. And this really shifted my perspective. So let's start with Bannon's opening remarks here, and you'll just see what I was just talking about.
Okay. So
this is going to be a long one. So
if I have your attention on the stage, we're going to follow a policy tonight. This person has been cautioned. If she does not stop, she will unfortunately be asked to leave this debate. So, Madame, it is your decision. You can stay or you can go. What are we going to do?
I kept this in just to show you what's going on.
Okay, no, sorry. You're still engaging. Officers, we're going to move forward with our plan. If we can please remove the person from the hall. Thank you very much. A big round of applause for the Toronto Police Services this evening. Fabulous job.
This person was just removed from the debate before they even got to hear anything the guy has to say. They just, half the people in this building. just
Okay,
think this
Stephen,
guy's
you've
a
got the
racist
floor
because that's what
again.
they're told.
Thank you. We're going to give you an extra minute on the clock.
No.
No?
I'll play by the rules. We're in the Oval Office. Secretary or head of the Federal Reserve, Bernanke, Hank Paulson, Secretary of the Treasury, walk in, tell the President of the United States, by 5 o'clock this afternoon, by close of business, we need $1 trillion cash infusion into the American financial system. If we don't get it, the American financial system will implode in 72 hours, the world financial system 3 days after that, and we will have global anarchy and chaos. The greatest enemies of the United States, Mussolini, Hitler, Tojo, the Soviet Union, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden.
By the way, he said the Soviet Union, not Russia, because the Soviet Union fell.
Nobody's ever brought the United States to its knees like that day. Who did that? Who's responsible for that? The populist? Donald Trump? No. The elites. The financial, the corporate, the permanent political class that runs Washington, D.C. That's who did it.
The permanent political class.
What was their solution? To create money and bail themselves out. On the day that happened, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve was $880 billion. When Donald Trump took the oath of office, January 20th, 2017, it was $4.5 trillion. We flooded the zone with liquidity, just like the Bank of Tokyo, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank. The party at Davos, the elites, bailed themselves out, afraid of some sort of deflationary death spiral. That's not a free bailout. There's a corollary to that. Savings accounts are zero.
Racist.
Pension funds have the biggest gap in history. You can't underwrite a bond in the United States because you only get, for a public school or waterworks, you get 2%. The little guy would bear the burden of that. If you've owned assets, intellectual property, stocks, real estate, hedge fund, name it, in the last 10 years, you had the greatest run in history. For everybody else, a disaster.
Now do you see why Steve Bannon's a racist and you should never listen to him and you should just immediately disown him and hate him? Now do you see? This is the thing. I was caught up in this propaganda about the Trump and MAGA people because they showed it to us. They showed you the worst aspects of the Trump movement, the redneck, drunk, hateful dickheads. And they are there. They're part of it. And that's why it's hard for a lot of people on the left to come around to what's happened, you know, because of course I hate those elements, those people that are just like, oh, fuck you. And we're, you know, all the racist elements of it. And those people do exist, but he would not have won the election if all that voted for him were racists. And I think one of the things I learned over the last several years is that most of the people who voted for Trump, my Hispanic, Black, and Asian friends included, just wanted something new, something different than the typical political class stand-ups we get every election cycle. The people that these groups, and Steve Bannon gets into this, so I'll shut up and let him keep talking.
50% of American families can't put $400 of cash on their hands on cash, right?
See, they're all laughing at him. He fumbled. By the way, I also want to really quick shout out Royce White. Royce White is a Black MAGA guy who's from Minneapolis who has a podcast. He's the one who posted this. I found this because of Royce White. Follow him on Twitter. Follow his podcast. Thank you, Royce. This is amazing.
I hate the elite. You got to lay that down there.
So there's a lady with a flag that says no to hate because she's been propagandized to think that Steve Bannon is a violent racist thug who wants to fascistly destroy America because that's what the TV has been telling everyone for 6 years.
60% of our jobs are subsistence jobs. It wasn't Donald Trump. It wasn't the populist. The populist movement, the nationalist movement, is not a cause of that. It's a product of that. Donald Trump's presidency is not a cause of that. It's a product of that. When I stepped into the campaign in mid-August, the central number is not how far he's behind, is that 70% of the American people believed for the first time in our history that the country was in decline and the elites were okay with that. That managed decline was the wave of the future. Whether it's in education, the southern border, China, Korea, Iran, our education, our health system. It was Donald Trump that turned that around. It's the party.
They're all laughing at him. and
It's a
let's be
very
honest,
tough crowd.
that's one of those claims that's real difficult to make. He turned what around? Look at where we're at now. You know, so he does make some points that are a little bit ridiculous.
We'll have plenty of time to go through this.
But I like his spirit. He doesn't get upset. He just laughs with him and goes, "I'll
The
get
party
ya."
at Davos, the scientific, managerial, engineering, financial, cultural elite that run the world have left a financial wasteland and decoupled from the middle class and the working class throughout the world. That is why Salvini and Orban,
Preach it, Steve.
and Brexit, and now Bolsonaro, it shouldn't be lost on you the day Captain Bolsonaro is elected is the day Angela Merkel will leave the stage. Trump's economic nationalism doesn't care about your race, your religion, your ethnicity, your color.
And again,
Okay.
watching this is just a lesson in propaganda, because when you look at the policies and they convinced people who thought Trump was a racist to vote for Joe Biden. I mean, that's all I have to say. I'll shut up and let Steve.
I got a whole night to convert you. I saw the 28%.
See, I love his spirit. He has such a good attitude about it. About them. They're laughing at him.
Doesn't matter your gender, doesn't
Mocking
matter
him.
your sexual preference. It matters.
But listen to what he's saying.
I said economic nationalism. Work with me. It cares if you're a citizen. Look at the results. Look at the results today. Lowest black unemployment in history, lowest Hispanic unemployment in 30 years. Wages rising across the board. Manufacturing jobs coming back. The populist nationalist message and its policies are working in the United States, and it's spreading. The revolt in Europe and now in Latin America. And I get contacted every day from Asia, from Africa, from the Middle East. We're at the beginning of a new political revolution, and that is populism. The only question before us, is it going to be a populist nationalism that believes in capitalism and deconstructing the administrative state and giving the little guy a piece of the action and break up this crony capitalism of big corporations and big government? Or is it going to be a Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders type of populist socialism? Because
did you hear the names he referenced? Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders.
the party at Davos and the elites have blown too many calls. Too many existential
Preach it,
events.
Steve.
The rise of China. The $7 trillion spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The deregulation that led to the financial crisis in 2008. How the financial crisis was bailed out. Where we are today in this over-leveraged society. Because as you know, most of you in this room that work in finance, we're heading to another financial crisis. That is the question before us. What form of populism? And I hope tonight that the good people in Toronto will listen with open ears as we debate this topic. Thank you very much.
So as you're going to see here, Steve's opponent does not really have much to debate in the way of economics or policy. He basically just calls him a racist. And this is David Frum, the guy who came up with the term axis of evil. So listen to, I'll let you hear just a little bit of his. I didn't clip.
And I stand here to reignite your faith and to speak to your courage. These symbols that many of us wear tonight on our lapels remind us that this is not the first time that democracy has faced thugs and crooks.
There's that democracy thing. We got to save democracy.
And bullies.
From the voters.
And would-be dictators and those who seek to build themselves up by tearing others down. This is not the first time that such people have puffed themselves as the wave of the future. They were wrong then, they are wrong now.
This guy worked for the George Bush administration, and he has the balls to say that. Listen to this. It gets better.
And it starts tonight. Now, we have a definitional problem as we begin this debate because we're using words that have large meanings, liberal, populist. We're not exactly sure how to use them. And
see, this is what I love about people who, you know, represent the establishment, like David Frum, former editor of The Atlantic, former Bush speechwriter, does. You're just not smart enough to understand what populism really is, guys. Let me explain this to you.
It's strange, and many people made the point, it's strange for me, a lifelong conservative, to be here on the liberal side of this debate. And I'm not.
And that right there is the moment you know the parties have switched. You listen to a guy like Steve Bannon, what he just said about economic populism, and he referenced Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders, and then you hear the liberal, this is the liberal side, quote unquote liberal. He's not a liberal. He even said he's a conservative, but he's a conservative, a well-known neocon, is making the liberal argument here. And this is why this is just so interesting to watch.
Not a liberal. I am a conservative, but what I and other conservatives in the English-speaking world have historically sought to conserve is a liberal heritage.
Power.
And this is something that conservatives and liberals share.
We see that we're losing power. The conservative and liberal establishment, the neoliberals and neoconservatives, are losing elections to populists like Steve Bannon.
That does not steal, a media that does not lie, courts that respect the right.
This is what he's saying he longs for. This guy was the editor of The Atlantic, and he's talking about a media that doesn't lie.
Rights of all, and voting that is available to everybody, even if the people who are counting the votes are afraid that those who are voting may vote against them.
And that is why the Democrats didn't caucus this year. They did mail-in ballots because democracy is so important. It's so very, very important. So here's David Frum projecting even more. Remember, this guy worked for the Bush administration. Just listen to this and try not to throw up in your mouth.
And what is populism? What is populism? It claims to speak for the people, but it always begins by subdividing the people and by saying some among the people, because of their skin or the way they pray or their gender or whom they love or how they conduct themselves or for some other reason. Some of the people are not the people. They are those people. Populism begins by dividing the country between those people and us people and saying those people do not matter and our people do. And it is only on that basis, and you see President Trump doing this again and again, where he will say things like, I got 52% of the vote of women. Well, that's not true. He got 52% of the vote of white women, but the others don't matter.
You see, because he's a racist. It's not that he just misspoke or you know, just said something off the cuff that wasn't completely true. It's because he's a racist.
For him, the people is always only part of the people. Those who think differently and those who report on our crooked business deals or our clandestine connections with hostile foreign powers, they are enemies of the people, even though they are exercising the rights that you would think would belong.
Yeah. Again, this guy worked for the George Bush administration. The guy who had business deals with Saudi Arabia when 9/11 happened. The guy who flew the Saudis out of the country after 9/11. And this guy has the balls to talk about corrupt business dealings. Oh my God. Like I said, try not to throw up in your mouth.
People. Why will this populist movement lose? And why will our liberal institutions prevail? And at bottom, it's for one reason, which is this new populism is a scam. It's a lie. It's a fake.
And that, my friends, is what we call psychological projection.
It has nothing. Now, I don't mean that just in the sense that so many of its leaders are crooks, although they are. President Trump.
Yeah, there were definitely no crooks in the Bush administration, right, David? Dick Cheney and Halliburton, all the basically the selling of the dicing up of the oil profits from Iraq and the no bid contracts and the crony capitalism stuff, all which you took part in. This is the most insane level of projection I've seen in a long time.
Is a crook. Viktor Orban is a crook. Marine Le Pen is a crook. And I don't mean that in the sense they say things that are not true. I mean, they are looting. Viktor Orban is looting Hungary on a post-Soviet scale. Marine Le Pen finances her party with Russian money and by stealing European parliamentary funds. And Donald Trump is running the most unethical administration in American history, enriching himself as he does.
Says the guy.
But I mean it in another way.
For the Bush administration.
Because it is a scam even on its own terms. What do they deliver? Donald Trump is running the American economy the way he ran his family businesses. He inherited a fortune, has proceeded to dissipate it, and is telling everybody what a great job he's been doing.
And George W. Bush, a guy whose father was also president, he's definitely not in that realm at all. The guy that I worked for that...
President Trump today took credit that in the month of October, 250,000 jobs were connected.
So I kind of left out. They get into some policy stuff there that's really, irrelevant. I just wanted to show you that throughout this debate, quote unquote, David Frum's defense is always a scare tactic and pearl clutching about democracy or racism. Those are the two constant punching bags he goes back to every time. At no point does he try to counter Bannon's arguments about elites ruining the country and cutting off the middle class and kind of the slow strangulation of the people at large. He just kind of projects about stuff like that. So anyway, in this next piece of it, Bannon kind of talks about the challenges that Trump ran into. And I think this is relevant because this is something I saw, it's kind of like he got wrapped up with the Republican establishment. And when he got in, I think he was in the same way that Obama was weighed down by the Republicans when he got in with implementing his agenda. I think there was a lot of anti-Trump sentiment in not only the Democratic Party, but also the establishment Republicans. Like they're at the end of the day, he's not a neocon. So a lot of the neocon holdovers, guys like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, I'm sure that they did everything in their power to subvert anything he wanted to do that was would drastically change things, as far as foreign relations and stuff go. But watch this.
On populism. This is a critical test. There's no doubt about it. I think if you look at what's going to happen, I believe we will hold the Senate.
They're talking
and I think
about
it's
the
a complete
midterms
dogfight for the House, and we'll see. If we lose the House of Representatives, I've told you, and I've seen David talking on TV, the Trump program will grind to a halt. There's no doubt about that. But remember, we understand it's a process. Both Brexit and 2016 are inextricably linked. Look at Brexit 2 years later. They're no closer to a deal than they first started, right? Because the establishment wasn't just going to pat the British workers on the head and say, what a great idea, why don't you just leave the EU? Just like with Donald Trump, they're not going to pat him on the head and say, this is fantastic. All your great populist and economic nationalist ideas, why don't you just take the keys and run for it? You're going to have to win election after election after election. And I think the Trump base understands that. I anticipate it's going to turn out. But I want to address one thing with David. We won as a coalition. One of the first things I did was reach out to the Republican establishment in mid-August. We had to win as a coalition, just like the Reagan coalition, where you had, economic conservatives, and you had anti-communists, and you had the religious right. We have the same thing. We have the establishment. We have the populist nationalist movement. We have limited government conservatives. We are a broad coalition. That's what needs to come together to win. In governing, David, we turned immediately to the Republican Party, our partner in that victory, who said, we've got it. Give us the keys on health care. We've been working on this for 7 years. The entire debacle on health care in that first year was 100% the Republican establishment. It turns out they didn't really have an idea about health care, okay? The same thing with taxes. Remember, we were going to start with the border adjustable tax that Paul Ryan had worked for 7 years on. In 90 days, that got blew up. blown up, and we had to do the tax plan we had, of which, by the way, I argued, as many as you know, to read the Wall Street Journal, in the Oval Office for a 44% tax rate of people that make over $5 million a year. And I was
44% tax rate on people that make over $5 million a year. That's Steve Bannon, famed right-wing racist, arguing to tax the rich. That is why these guys were painted as racists who want to subvert democracy in America. That is, I mean, you can't watch this guy talk and not see that at this point.
Blown up. I was blown up by the progressive Democrats that were in the administration. The Wall Street guys who forced in the big tax cuts, of which President Trump has now realized, I think, was not actually the best thing to do. That's why he brought the middle class tax cut last week. It did.
And they all laugh at him.
You know, it takes a while. He's getting his sea legs. You don't start day one.
I mean, people laugh at that. I can't believe people are laughing at that. It's when you listen.
So I think that's a great segue to bring some Frum into this conversation.
The best defense of Donald Trump is the job's just too hard for him.
Yeah, see, and at no point does David Frum make any kind of political or economic argument ever in this debate. And that's why I didn't clip a lot of his stuff, because he goes back to racist, threat to democracy, and dummy every time. That's all he's got. Those are the three arrows in his quiver.
He's not the best defense is he looks cruel and unfeeling and bigoted and hateful, but really the problem is he's just never.
This is the guy who wrote the Axis of Evil speech for George W. Bush.
Run a large enterprise before, and he certainly never paid his debts before. So how could he do it?
Yeah, if anyone knows anything about, obedience to the law and moral superiority, it's George W. Bush and the people that so listen to this. I forgot Frum does have one more quiver in his arrow, and it's Russia, as you guess.
If the suggestion is, as you've made a couple of times, that it's the deplorables, meaning Trump supporters, who are doing the fighting for the United States, this is an example of one of the real ills of populism, because may I remind you that force is 1/3 made up of non-white people who certainly did not vote for Donald Trump. And they get forgotten and omitted from the story. We have to be able, as we see the country, as we see the United States.
Trump is a racist. He's playing the hits.
States, to see it as it is. You're only a patriot if you love your country as it is, not as you imagine it might have been in the past, and not if you begin to chop off groups of people you think do not belong.
By the way, just for people who don't know, Frum is also a Canadian. He's not even an American.
There, Donald Trump on NATO. Donald Trump on NATO has made it clear through the campaign that if it's up to him, NATO countries are not being defended. Estonia, he told Maggie Haberman and David Sanger of the New York Times in an interview at the time of the Republican convention.
We just went over how credible the New York Times is, right?
Not going to defend it if it's up to him. Estonia is a NATO partner. But overhanging all of this, I don't think you can talk about the Trump foreign policy.
So, again, watching this just blew my mind, because this is why the liberals are all now like pro-war, pro-censorship, neocons. Listen to this guy. He's like, oh, Trump, he's talking about NATO. I mean, who is out there voting like, we need to keep NATO? Yeah, like no one is voting. No one's like, hey, you know what I think we really need to make sure stays in place is that post-World War II organization we created to defend us from the spread of fascism or communism that basically sucks up billions of dollars worth of our money so that we can funnel them to defense contractors in the name of defending other countries in Europe. And we saw where that went recently.
Any of these, by the way, these parties that you advise through Europe, they all
racist.
have some sinister, murky connection to Russian power. The National Front, funded by them.
Sorry, they're all sinisterly connected to Russia, says the guy who wrote the Axis of Evil speech for George W. Bush and was the editor of The Atlantic and is Canadian and is one of the foremost propagandizers in the last like 20 years of the general public.
Your Italian friends have, and as I said, I do not put this on you. I know you wore the uniform, but I don't know how you, having worn the uniform, can.
This is what I love too. Trump is a secret Russian. Yeah, the guy who literally has had everything in the United States handed to him on a silver platter, has lived like the absolute best life, wants to subvert the country that gave him that. We're supposed to believe that Trump, and he plays that card right here. Oh yeah, like they're all connected to Russia, and I know you served in the military, so I'm not questioning you, but like, hey, how can you work with these guys? It's so fake and disingenuous.
Sit with these people who have these sinister connections and know that there is someone else who does not have the interests of your country, my adopted country, at heart.
See,
and he is calling
my adopted country. This guy's a Canadian too. I love that. That's the best part of this.
The tune for all of these populist parties.
A Canadian is making the establishment argument on behalf of the American public against the, obviously insane racist Steve Bannon. All right, I got another great one for you. So, just to set this up a little bit, in this next clip, we have Bannon talking about the deplorables, and I love that he kind of wears that term as a badge of honor, because it really was, I think that really was a point in the campaign when Hillary Clinton lost a lot of people, when she just referred to people who might not think the way that she does as deplorables. Like that it was just, you think about how Obama won, right? Like Obama didn't, and I see this with Vivek too. Obama was such a good speaker and such a rational guy. He was so good at like appealing to the conservatives and the liberals, and he was very careful not to offend the religious sensibilities of middle America and the heartland, and Hillary Clinton just didn't have that in her.
Had her last command. She's back at West Point where she's on the staff.
So this is him kind of responding to Trump's erase, like, how can you support the Russians and the racists when you are involved with the
I think she had 15 non-commissioned officers, all of them African American or Hispanic, right? I think something like a third or 40% of the United States Army today is made up of African Americans alone. Donald Trump understands that. The deplorables understand that. Remember, one of the focuses we have, that's why black unemployment's so low, Hispanic unemployment's so low. One of the focuses we have as a populist movement is to take 25% of Bernie Sanders' movement, the economic nationalists in that. The focus, and I've said this from day one, it's to get a third to 40% of the African American vote and a third to 40% of the Hispanic vote, the working class and middle class. That realignment with the Trump base will give us a governing majority for 50 years. It'll be like 1932. 1.8 million African Americans that voted for Barack Obama did not vote for Hillary Clinton. Now, they weren't prepared to vote for Donald Trump. And I think you're going to see the same thing. They may not be prepared to vote for Donald Trump now, but it's a process. I think that the Democratic Party is going to be in complete shock on Tuesday about the turnout of the African American vote, and I think the Hispanic vote.
If Donald Trump and the Republicans,
and I don't know if you remember this or not, but they kind of were. Trump actually increased, the Republicans increased their numbers in those communities at that time.
And his Republican Party, as it's been remade, not the McCain Party, not the Bush Party, not the party I believed in. If they believed that African Americans were going to vote for them, they would allow them to vote rather than bending heaven and earth to stop them.
Yeah, we just covered, I just spent the first half of this stream covering how important it is for Democrats that you vote. They're so clearly, trying to have a transparent caucus in Iowa this year, and not trying to take Trump off the ballot now. Good old Frummy. Good old Frummy. So Steve Bannon kind of continues here. We're almost done. I encourage you to go watch this whole thing.
While, of course, no one wants violence, how much more airtime it gives to subliminal anti-Semitic messaging. I think,
subliminal anti-Semitic.
It's not even outward racism now; it's subliminal anti-Semitic messaging. Those racists,
Jew who
smart.
hears the way George Soros is talked about, knows the text beneath the text. When George,
so here you have a conservative commentator defending George Soros by weaponizing the HR department and using claims of anti-Semitism. Now, Steve's response is actually really good. So listen to what he says.
And I think, in a way, I can't, of course, put myself completely in the person's shoes, but try to imagine how must it to be to black people or to Mexican Americans or to Asian Americans or members of any other.
The guy who wrote the Axis of Evil speech is so concerned about racism.
When you hear this barrage and you hear something that seems like, oh, we're just talking about this one shadowy mastermind, a plutocratic person who bends the world to his will through his monetary conspiracy, not everybody else, just this one person, we all hear it and we know what is meant. And it has resonance through history and we feel endangered.
We know what he means when he says that. And this is from 2018. So you saw how this, and this guy works for think tanks. He works for the media. He works in. This is how this evolved into we need to censor people online who are offensive, and it's proof that it's a completely disingenuous and a tool of control. When you watch a guy like David Frum, the guy who wrote the Axis of Evil speech for George W. Bush, play the liberal against Steve Bannon here. You're a racist.
To be conscious.
I encourage you to go and watch the whole thing. I obviously didn't want to show the whole thing because like an hour and 45 minutes or something. But literally, most of it is just Steve Bannon talking about populism and then David Frum accusing Trump and him of being a racist or a Russian.
Conscious of the time.
Can I respond to this?
Yeah. Are you going to respond to it? And then,
George,
hold on a second. We're going to respond to that just so the audience knows where we're going, and then we're going to go to closing statements. Okay. So
we're having such a good time. I thought we'd engage some more. Well, let's waive our clothing statement and still have combat. George Soros, I said in the New York Times the other day, George Soros is demonized because he's effective, not because he's Jewish. And he's been very proud of how effective he's been. I kind of model myself and my NGOs on George Soros. That's how effective he's been in Europe and the United States. And he has not been shy about bragging about that over the last 10 years, of what he's done, how much money he's put to work. He's been incredibly effective. In that regard, he is a role model on his effectiveness. But as I said the other day, when you're that out there, I've got security all the time, and I'm a grundoon. It's the emissions price.
What does that mean? What's a grundoon? I'm gonna have to look that up.
The emissions price when you're dealing in this type of environment, it's the emissions price. And this is not about George Soros being Jewish. It's just
he did you hear what he said there? That's kind of relevant, and I think it's not funny, but I like what he said. He said, when you're in this type of environments, it's the admissions price. If you're going to be in politics, you're going to upset people. And so you just have to be prepared for that. That's very rational and very intelligent thing to say.
Like globalists, it's not some dog whistle for it's not about the Illuminati or the Jesuits or the Freemasons or the protocols of the elders of Zion. Okay, the party at Davos, this is the thing, there's no conspiracy, it's in your face. It's in your face every day. Look at the op-ed that was written, the anonymous op-ed that was written about President Trump, this kind of rolling coup in his administration. They're quite proud of the establishment Republican who said, we're the steady state. That's what it is.
So just to remind you about that, that's an interesting point. I don't know if you remember this during the Trump administration, one of his administration officials wrote an anonymous op-ed in the New York Times about him. And I mean, again, we know how credible the New York Times is, but what he said right there, the guy in the anonymous op-ed referred to themselves as the steady state, aka the people who work in DC and would be upset if their little game was upended.
There's no hidden conspiracy, and there's certainly no subliminal. The commercal that they rip on President Trump was written by myself and Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller's Jewish. There was nothing trying any code words about that. It was off a Hillary Clinton speech.
And this is the thing that just, the acid that's dropped on Trump every day about this, to try to delegitimize him as a president. He has not been delegitimized. He has not. This is the nullification project, David, that started from the moment he won. The establishment rejected him. They considered him a clown. They considered us clowns. An island of misfit toys that kind of, ran this campaign and at least reached out to working people and said, yes, your concerns are our concerns.
Oh my God. Preach it, brother Steve. Thanks again. Again, I want to call out Royce White. If you've never checked out his podcast, it's amazing. Royce White, he's a libertarian, I believe. I don't want to speak for him because I don't know his political leanings. I just like his content. And this is something that he posted. So thank you, Royce. And I want to hear that one more time.
That's why we won Michigan. That's why we won Wisconsin. That's why.
Hold on, let me back that up.
The establishment rejected him. They considered him a clown. They considered us clowns. An island of misfit toys that kind of, ran this campaign.
Okay, an island of misfit toys. Do you remember, and I just want to, for all the lefties, do you remember what they did to Bernie Sanders? Do you remember what they did? They called us misogynist Bernie bros. There was when he won Nevada, they said Putin wanted him to win. They ran all the same shit on Bernie. The difference is Bernie didn't have the balls to stand up to it. And Trump is the kind of guy who will stand up to it. And whether you like him or not, you got to respect that. He ended up winning not because of racism, not because of Putin, but because he spoke to people that wanted something different.
Campaign and at least reach out to working people and said, yes, your concerns are our concerns. That's why we won Michigan. That's why we won Wisconsin. That's why we won Ohio. It wasn't Trump that didn't use Barack Obama, right, to go to places like Iowa where he had won in landslides before, or Ohio or these other districts. That was Hillary Clinton's campaign. This thing of the total demonization, I understand how he's triggered people. That's why we may lose the House. The left, the Time's Up movement, the resistance, and the Tom Steyer movement. I disagree with their ideology. I admire their grit and determination because they understood something that David and the Republican establishment did not get. That Donald Trump is a transformative president and a historic figure. He's going to be in your lives 10, 20, and 30 years from now. That's a Kafkaesque novel, isn't it? It is. And it's just not about the judges and the 140 federal judges in appellate court that are going to go to 200, that are all going to be Federalist Society and textualists and originalists and deconstruct the administrative state. It's what he's doing from a legislative point of view. Trump
Deconstruct the administrative state. That's a phrase that I think a lot of people on the left can get down with. I know the libertarians are down with it, but that's something that populists can come together around.
And that's why do you think
it needs to change? It's clear.
I think the left has been out there like the Tea Party. Why do they think they've been out there since April and May, doing the hard work of politics, knocking on doors? You know why? They know they have to stop him on Tuesday or he's going to get further in their lives. They understand he's transformative. They understand he's an historical president, and it's just going to keep on.
Okay. Now, you may or may not agree with that, but I'm just going to show you this last clip. This is Bannon's closing statement. And again, you can't listen to this and not agree with a lot of it if you have similar political leanings to myself. Look at Frum.
President Trump identified himself as a nationalist the other day, right? And the media went to a complete meltdown. Judge President Trump and this populist movement and the populist movement worldwide, judged by their actions. Hold them accountable. We're not perfect. People are trying to figure this out as they go, but I will tell you one thing. The little guy, this is about the little guy versus the elites. The little guy identifies with that, whether it's in Hungary, whether it's in Italy, whether it's in Brazil, whether it's in the United States of America. The future obviously belongs to populism. It's only going to be defined by, is it left-wing populism or conservative and right-wing populism? Is it about deconstructing the administrative state and opening up the power of capitalism?
There's that term again.
Or is it going
to deconstructing the administrative state?
Be about more state intervention in your entire life? because that is going to be the future. The battle going forward in the United States is against the Bernie Sanders and the Cory Bookers and Elizabeth Warren and that aspect of the Democratic Party that grows in strength every day, the resistance. That's the reality. The rest of it's just happy talk. The other thing, don't look beyond the smears, the signal and the noise. Look at the signal. Look at the actions. Look how they're bringing people in. Look how this populist movement will reach out and take the economic nationalists and the Bernie Sanders movement. Look how we will go and accommodate and bring in a third of the African American vote in our country, something the Republican Party for decades and decades and decades talked about and never did. Look at right now, I think it's 40%, the poll today, 40% of Hispanics agree with what President Trump's doing on the border because they understand they bear the burden of the solutions of that. I'm not saying President Trump's perfect. He wouldn't say he's perfect. He's a very imperfect instrument. He might not say he's an imperfect instrument, but
I think that's why Bannon got fired.
I can understand David's frustration. I can understand the angst. You know, as one of the senior public intellectuals and leaders of the Bush administration, the traditional the Republican Party, look at the 16 people that ran against President Trump in 2016, or the 14. They were a flower of a generation of donor money, of heritage, of AEI, of Cato, of Paul Singer, of the Kochs, of all of it. And look at the quality of the people. Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio, Governor Christie, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, every vertical had its best person. It was the strongest field in the history of the Republican Party. And Donald Trump cut through that like a sift through grass, right? Why? Because he talked about trade. He talked about this radical idea, a radical idea of free trade, particularly when you're going against a totalitarian.
No, because everyone in America is a racist, Steve. That's why he won.
Mercantilist society like China. He talked about the deindustrialization of our country. He talked about where people's lives are. He talked about what mattered. That's why he won. That's why he won the Republican primary, and that's why he beat Hillary Clinton. Our whole thing was to compare and contrast. You're the tribune of the people, and she is the guardian of a corrupt and incompetent elite, a permanent political class.
You hear people clapping?
Somehow I see I'm not quite connecting. This is the future. And it's not, and I realize David tonight tried to demonize us. It's not racist, it's not nativist, it's not xenophobic. The deplorables are the finest people. We're in the fourth turning of American history. We had the Revolution, the Civil War, Great Depression, World War II. And now the fourth turning. Every 80 to 100 years this happens because in generational history, it's the movie David was in with me. It's about how you're raised. How you raise the generation. We're in the great fourth turning. In the next 10, 15, or 20 years, the United States is going to be, we're either going to be the country we're bequeathed or going to be something totally different. And the backbone of our country, we're not an idea. America's not an idea, it's a nation. We have the greatest land and the greatest resources. We have divinely inspired Constitution and Declaration of Independence. But that's not our strength. Our strength is the deplorables, just like in Canada. It's the little guy. It's upon their shoulders everything rests. And they're the backbone of the populist movement. They're not racist, they're not nativists, they're not xenophobes. They're citizens of the greatest country in mankind's history. And they, not Donald Trump, not Stephen K. Bannon, not Mike Pence, they are going to lead us through this great turmoil to come. Thank you very much for having us tonight.
I don't know if calling America the greatest country in mankind's history is going to play well to a Canadian audience, but good on you, Steve. Very, very proud. And, you know, to sum that up, I don't want to spoiler alert. He turns the audience. He ends up winning. The question that they're debating is, what is the future of politics? Is it liberalism or populism? And at the end of the debate, despite the people protesting him as a racist when it starts, he has won the minds of the people. You know, it's like 57 to 43% or something like that. So a big portion of them still didn't kind of see his way of thinking. But he did win, and credit to the people there too for being open-minded and actually looking past the propaganda of the last, 10 years around all this, because I was victim to it too. They showed all the worst elements of the Trump campaign when he was running. I voted for Clinton. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. It's I regret it now, but I did it, and I realize that, you know, it's one of those things that I was misled on, and now what I try to do is see everyone as an equal and see past the left versus right, conservative versus liberal bullshit, because like I showed you earlier with Vivek, he sounds like the modern conservatives, the people that are actually making waves in the Republican Party today, like Trump and Vivek. I mean, it's so clear that the establishment, as it will, is trying to put over the people they want, like Nikki Haley and DeSantis and, you know, any of the other people in the field. But the public sees through that clearly now. And, you know, I think obviously that's one of the reasons they want such tight control on the internet, and one of the reasons that speech has become a whole thing. And I had a segment to do with Obama talking about that, but I'm going to save that for later because I've already been on for over 2 hours. So I always like to end with something funny. And so just before we log off, I'm going to show you this bit. It's a very short bit about the Democrats, just to kind of tie this all up with a nice little bow. And thank you for listening, and Happy New Year. And I hope to talk to y'all soon. Take good care of yourselves, and here we go.
Republican, but I don't want to be a Democrat either. To me, the Democratic Party is very loserish. Very loserish group. To me, the Democratic Party is like when you have a crush on a guy and he's really hot, he asks you out, you're on a date, it's going so good, you're sharing stories, you have chemistry, you're laughing, so you go back to his place with him, and then you're like making out, and you're like, oh shit. And then he can't get his dick hard. That's the Democratic Party. Because it's like, really? We're not going to do anything? Why did you say all those things to me?